All right. We are, hold on. We got some people coming in. All right. We are live and back for the final installment of the fall 2021 Queen's Podcast Lab Learning Series. And today we are going to be talking about the business or the field of video game creation with we have an in-house expert you might not know here at Queen's College. Rob Garfield. He's listed as James on a lot of the communications. Rob Garfield from Queen's College's Center for Teaching and Learning is a video game creator and a learning expert here at Queen's College. And we are meeting with him today to learn about the ins and outs of the video game creation world. If you're like me and you love gaming and you got a taste for programming or game design, and you've ever wondered what goes into video game creating, what skills do I need to acquire? Is there any way to make a living out of it? Well, luckily we have someone with firsthand knowledge of that space. So welcome, Rob, to the learning series.
Thank you, Joe. It's good to be here.
Maybe can we start off by getting you to introduce yourself, maybe what you do here at Queen's College and your background in video games?
Sure. My name is Rob Garfield, as Joe said. I work at the Center for Teaching and Learning. My title here is Instructional Technologist and Designer. So I work with faculty to help them use technology purposefully in the pursuit of teaching and learning in the classroom.
Awesome. And how? So you help faculty learn to use technology to get better learning outcomes, and you came
Right.
to this position from the world of video games?
Yes, there were a couple of stops along the way. So I originally when I started my professional career, I was in publishing. I moved to New York and I was in publishing. I'm a poet as well. As a video. Yeah, I've been through a number of different things, although poetry is a line that continues to this day. And I was working in publishing for a while, and I needed to get a job that paid more money. I was living in New York City, and I ended up I had a friend who worked for a bank, and the bank hired me as a technical writer. I had no tech background really at all. And I started at the bank writing technical literature, user guides, and things like that, and started absorbing technology. And I've always been a gamer. I started, when I was fairly young, playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friends.
Yeah.
And I wasn't as much of a nerd as that sounds, but pretty nerdy. And my family is very much into games. I played board games, card games. Competition was a big part of my upbringing, and when computer games started getting big, I found them fascinating and very interesting. And when somebody finally transposed Dungeons and Dragons into the computer gaming world, I was hooked. And at a certain point, I decided, hey, maybe I should take a look at this and see if I could get into the industry. And I had no idea. I didn't have a podcast like this to introduce me to how it was that one got into the industry. So I ended up going to an entertainment arts college that had a game programming track in Winter Park, Florida, and I got a degree, an associate's degree out of that, and worked in the industry for a bit of time, then went back to that school and taught game development for a couple of years, and then moved into the creation of simulations. And I created simulations, which is the gaming industry, really. It's just for the real world. And I missed academia, and I was moving back to New York, and I ended up getting a job at Columbia doing educational technology, and I've been doing that ever since.
So when you boil it, first of all, it's interesting. You did not come to video games from a programming background, but from a writing background.
Yes.
Which is kind of interesting, because when you imagine what goes into video gaming, you think of coding. But there's more to creating a game than coding. What else is involved then? What do you need to create a game?
Ooh. So, I mean, there are all sorts of different. So I actually, even though I came from a writing background and a humanities background, I did go into programming.
Okay.
But there are other options in the gaming world. I mean, games these days are, especially what they call AAA titles, are made by over 4 or 5 years by teams of 100.
Right.
There are programmers in that group, lots of them. There are people who make three-dimensional assets, models and things like that. People who make two-dimensional assets, textures, backdrops, UI elements, things like that. There are animators who take the 3D or 2D models and animate them and make them move realistically if the game calls for that. There's sound design. So there are audio people involved, art people, programmers, and people who do what I would call, they're sort of virtual architects, level designers. They create the spaces and the worlds that you move around in.
But on the flip side, I see very, very popular text app games that required virtually on the flip side. There are people who appear to have made a ton of money on video games that have no digital assets, just about.
I think the computer games started with what they call MUDs, which are multi-user dungeons, and they were kind of like the text-based version of our massively multiplayer online role-playing games of today. And those were networks. They were glorified chat lobbies in a certain way. And when I say glorified, I'm underselling it, because somebody wrote hundreds and hundreds of pages of content and the logic that made the content intelligible. So there's all sorts of stuff. There are people. There are other models for this too, right? They're the solo game developers. I don't think there are a whole lot of them, but some people who are really just sort of Renaissance people with lots of different talents, who know about all different aspects of game development and are programmers and can create games on their own. And they create games on a level that does not have the same kind of production value as a AAA title, but it's often, you get the more hardcore gamers are into that sort of thing, because these people tend to be more interested in really engaging gameplay. So
I have a question.
Sure.
There are young people who dream of creating a game. And if they came to you and they said, I've always wanted to create a game, I'd like to try my hand on it, where do I start? What do I do? How do I get started? What would you say to them?
Well, you're gonna want to learn programming, and to my mind, I would recommend learning a programming language that's fairly low level, like a C or C++. You can do things in Python and things like that, but games tend to be pretty demanding on your system. Especially if you have lots of fancy graphics, or you need to load a lot of things into RAM, things like that. So I would learn I would learn how to program. And how do you learn how to program? So you have a number of different avenues to doing that. One of which is the sort of autodidactic avenue, which is to become part of online communities of programmers. Work on developing your skills, taking on projects, working, with what we call passion projects. Working outside on developing things. I would say set yourself a goal of making a game. I think the first thing that I did was I made Pong in Windows. And then I fancied it up.
I guess it's also like, I would imagine that there's such a wide range of games that the way you get started depends on the type of game and the type of strengths you bring to gaming, right? Like, so for example, if you're a storyteller and you have an RPG, a role-playing game or an adventure game that tells a story, then I guess you work on a script. Whereas if you want to make an action game, then I guess you're trying to think of like how to program, I don't know, the physics of a game, or like an event simulator or things like that.
Sure.
So
you need to if you're making a game that's real time, let's take the highest level of this is there's what you might call turn-based, and then there's real time. And a real-time game has what's called a game loop that's constantly running, right? So you have to learn how to program a game loop. What is that? And I mean, I think even turn-based games tend to have a game loop, just
slower and simpler type of thing.
Yeah, but I would say also I would have in mind when you're first starting out, I would have in mind what you want to do ultimately, but I would also make sure that whatever you start on, it's creating a game, and that game is complete, and you do it and you finish it and you start your portfolio. Because what you're going to want to do to get into the industry is show people that you can complete things. That's one of the most important elements of getting into the industry. As from a production perspective, there are lots of people who can program,
right?
But are you the sort of person who can manage their time well enough and are passionate enough about it to finish projects?
So would the smart move to be like maybe start making some text-based games, just to sort of get started and create, and then just sort of build out from there? Is that
sure? If you're starting from ground zero, I would say don't take on the real-time game loop to begin with, but just start creating interactions, interactive experiences. You can even do a browser-based setup if you want. But I would start by picking a programming language like C or C++. In fact, I would pick one of those two. Try to start learning it. You could go to school for comp sci. There are also schools that, like the one I went to, which specifically teach you how to program in a certain way. And one of the big things that I understand is going on now is people are going to programming boot camps, where you you program for 10 hours a day for 2 weeks to a month or something like that. And I actually have to say, my experience of learning programming, I feel like that's a really effective way to learn it. You really want to be, in order to become a good programmer, you need to be immersed in it.
We have a question for you from Anthony Borelli. Anthony from WQMC.
Hey guys, how you doing? I'm enjoying the conversation. I just wanted to ask a question. You were talking earlier about how if you want to get into this, you're going to need a nice setup, like a nice PC, hard drive, good fans in your computer. You're going to want the works, as it's going to take a toll on your computer. Is there, what would you say to help people who might not come from a household that have access to that equipment? Like, what do you think do you think there's a way for people who don't have access to or have the money to go out and buy that technology? Where do you think that they should start? And do you know of any programs or anything that could really help them get going in learning about this and learning about the subject and how to go about making video games or just coding in general?
Okay, so first I want to roll back I don't think you need incredible equipment to get started. And I think that if your thought is to make a graphically intensive game, then you probably need a good computer with lots of RAM and a decent graphics card. But I don't think that's necessary for making games. You do need to have I think that you do need to have a computer that you can work with. You need to have a modicum of RAM that you can use, but you can still be creating interactions. I think that what I was trying to say is that you want to start with a low level programming language like C or C++, Java, maybe even. You want to be starting with something like that because games can be intensive, and programming in those languages gives you the best bang for your buck in terms of using your computer's resources. So that's what I would say. As far as I'm not really up on what the best programs are right now for learning how to code. I think we could probably put some resources together for people who are interested in that. I think one thing you need to assess if you're starting is like, how much time do you have? When is that time? Is it something that you could integrate with what you're doing right now? For example, are you an undergrad at Queen's and taking computer science classes? If you are there projects within those classes where you could make a game? If not, when could you do a boot camp? If you don't have the money for that, how could you get involved with, say, free code camp or something like that online to get free tutorials?
Can I interject?
Sure.
Just in my own experience for programming in data science, O'Reilly books and Stack Overflow are the aspiring programmers' two best friends. And when I teach, I say, go get one of those easy reference guides and then just run small projects and actually problem solve. And I'd imagine if video game programming is like data analysis, then the real way to get good is to make 100 games. Just make game after game after game that leverages whatever you want to focus on. Like if you want to make choose your own adventure stories, by all means, or some type of, you like making simulations or things like that. You know what I was thinking about though, Rob? Video gaming is very complicated, and there are roles in the video game creating world that don't have a lot of that might not have that much computer programming. If you want to take a certain role, like for example, there's a big board game creating enterprise, or there's aspects of creating Dungeons and Dragons story that can be completely on paper. Can you speak to any of that aspect of it? Do you have any contact with that? Or you do any story writing, or are you more of a programming and simulation guy?
I'm more of a programming and simulation guy, but I do have that background in Dungeons and Dragons, and I hooked up with so the school I went to, Dave Arneson, who's since passed away, taught there, and I became friends with him, and I helped him convert some of his modules between different versions of Dungeons and Dragons. You know how the new versions will change the rule sets radically, like between 2 and 3 rule sets change radically.
Dungeons and Dragons is a good sort of entryway into gaming, though, because it acquaints you. I was also a D&D kid, and it acquaints you with like random number generators and how those can be used. and you get used to very elaborate rule systems, which I guess is also part of it. So there's a lot of the Dungeons and Dragons experience, I think, that sensitizes you to the back end of what would be involved in creating a game experience of that sort, an RPG adventure game experience.
Yeah, especially if you're really into D&D and you like research, how to optimize your character and things like that, make the best two-handed fighter or whatever. That is the sort of thinking that goes into developing rule sets and understanding how rules get implemented and make a game fun.
Anthony, did you have something to say?
Also thank you for answering my question earlier. I wanted to bring up, it's a little off, not off topic, but somewhat related. There's these things now called alternate reality games, ARGs, that I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but it's like, when a movie is doing a marketing thing and they'll have you go on a scavenger hunt on the internet. It's kind of stuff like that. Like I just watched there's a filmmaker online named Alex Bailey, and he makes these SpongeBob conspiracy theories about the show. It's very goofy, but it's also a part of this film series he's doing where there's some kind of horror monster controlling him. And there's multiple YouTube channels connected, and you go and watch them and make the connections. They have a Discord with a Google Docs, like archive of everything that's happened so far. And there's code hidden on websites. There's people go on scavenger hunts and use code to figure things out. There's a whole channel called Inside the Mind that delves into these ARGs. And it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen, because it's like a mix of filmmaking, it's a mix of writing, it's a mix of coding and gaming. And all of these people are having so much fun in this communal thing that affects the story. It progresses it along, and the filmmaker gets something out of it too. I definitely recommend looking into one or two, or just looking them up in general. It's one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And the rapper and artist Donald Glover, Childish Gambino, when he released his album Because the Internet, he was going on going around for like interviews for the release of the album, talking about coding. And he coded in on YouTube a whole movie that ties into his album, and people had to go searching for the code. So there's many other uses. And as you're talking about D&D, I was thinking about this, because you're right. Games don't just mean video games. Like, you can do so much with that as a concept, and there's so many possibilities. It's really cool. Just throw my 2 cents in there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for mentioning that. There's the whole augmented reality element too. I know people design tours that you can go through on the internet and in real life, and in physical space and things like that. And augmented reality has been with us in museums for decades. So you see people walking around with headphones on.
We got a couple comments here. Josh Barnes is here with us. Says, love turn-based games, especially the earlier Final Fantasy games. I'm with him on that one. I loved Final Fantasy. Sunk a lot of lifetime hours into the Final Fantasy franchise. Jason Tuga writes, I had the D&D phase too. There's a D&D plot in my memoir, the one the one you get. It really gets into your consciousness. I still think about it. That's Jason. He's on. And then we have a question from Ryan Sperry. How do you think that streaming services like Twitch have affected video gaming?
Ooh, that's a big question. I'm not really sure. I mean, one thing that the explosion of communication around games has done is it's changed the way that people play them. In particular, games that might be difficult or extensive. I think about MMOs because we brought it up a little while ago, but these are games that are intended for people to play in perpetuity, right? And they're often set up one of the major business models is the subscription model, and so you pay X number of dollars per month. So there's a motivation for the player to optimize their journey through the game, and Twitch streaming and other ways of sharing information on the internet have completely changed this around. So you look at the way that World of Warcraft, I think it came out in 2004, but just recently, just a couple of years ago, they released Blizzard, the company, Blizzard Activision, the company that makes the game, they released World of Warcraft Classic. So they set up a whole bunch of servers. They all they did was update the graphics. Everything else was the same. And so you went back and you played the first version of World of Warcraft. And watching the way that people played now versus the way they played in 2004 through 6, it's pretty intense, pretty different. People got to the end game so much quicker. People were consuming all the content so much quicker because they knew the optimal routes. They interacted with each other and things like that. That's amazing. Classic RuneScape. Yeah. So that's a really cool. I mean, Twitches and other streaming services have brought all sorts of games to people, to the attention of people. They become marketing tools. That's probably the biggest thing that they've done. And they've created a whole new market, which is the gaming broadcasting market and esports and things like that, so that we have a whole new area with lots of money in it. And you see some of the top streamers are really, really making a lot of money. And they're getting paid by game companies to basically advertise their games and by playing them.
I think video games have assumed such a huge place in our culture now that it's natural that there'd be a whole media that grows up around. It's like sports, right? People love the Yankees. People love World of Warcraft. And I bet you the World of Warcraft audience is probably a lot bigger than the Yankees audience. So it makes sense.
The Yankees are better than World of Warcraft.
There's no question. Well, I guess that a bunch of guys our age might say that, right? But, anyhow, are there other questions for Rob Garfield? Rob, I have a question. So you're a Queen's College student and you're totally into gaming. Do you what do you do? What do you do? You say put out some games, just throw your hat in the ring, take some comp sci classes?
Yeah, I would say that the other big thing, and maybe the biggest thing, is to become involved in gaming communities, game development communities. So pay attention to what's going on in the industry. I still think that places like Gama Sutra, certainly the IDGA, which is the International IGDA, International Game Developers Association, and places like that are still the go-tos. Gama Sutra, I think, is called Game Developer now. I actually went looking for it in preparation for today, and I think it's called Game Developer now. But these are places where you can find out what's actually going on in the industry. I know that IGDA has communities that you can join online, and people are talking about game design and game development all the time, and I highly recommend that. The other thing is to get involved with communities of modding tools development, and or content creation. It depends on what thing is your shtick. I had, when I went to school, there was a guy that I worked with who he wasn't a particularly great coder. He was a very smart guy, but he wasn't a great coder. But he was so fantastic at level design, and he was working in the Unreal Engine, and he had developed levels for all sorts of different games, that before we even graduated, he was hired by Raven Software. And he's still in the game industry. I looked him up recently just to say hi. He's still in the game industry and one of the top level designers around. So he was just doing that on his own. He was creating levels because he loved playing and he loved the idea of, virtual architecture. He taught himself all the tools necessary and participated in the community, and people knew his name, and Raven came a calling.
I saw somebody who made a mod for Skyrim eventually spun that mod off into a very, very successful independently published game. I wish I had the. I have an interesting question. This is from Paulo Lelis. Are there any WYSIWYG type platforms that you recommend for gaming or simulation creation? I'm interested in this for the purpose of workforce development simulation trainings, perhaps even for prototyping these simulations before an instructional technologist is brought onto a project. Do you have any recommendations, or do you know what the industry standard sort of front ends or WYSIWYG platforms are to do this type of stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, the Unreal engine is still a big one, and the Unity engine is also really big. And I think Unity is free, right? You can download Unity for free. So that's, well, there you go. And lots of games, actual games, that are being sold and marketed now are being developed with Unity. So these are things that I know about, but I'm not sure how what the learning curve is for them. I think probably there's a way. Well, with Unreal, you can just jump in and start creating levels. It's not that hard to get going. It's hard to get good, but it's not that hard to get going.
Unity and Unreal were the two industry standard engines. And an engine, for just people who've never heard of it, an engine it's a platform that sort of makes it easier for you to make games.
Yeah, so an engine is something that sort of, it's like the equivalent of Blackboard for a game.
Okay.
Blackboard to a course is an engine to a game. Engines will they tend to have baked in with them the game loop. They have tools for creating levels. They have tools for scripting tools for creating logic. Like if I do this, then that happens. They have physics engines, so you don't have to. You can just tap into those things that are there.
Jason, you got a question from Jason Tuga. Jason.
Hey, Rob.
Hey, Jason.
How's it going? I have a question. Since here at Queens College, we have tons of students interested in the idea of working in the gaming industry, but I have actually had a couple get involved and find a way in, but most of them, I think, find it pretty hard to find a route into the industry. And I was just thinking, I don't know, I'm sure off the top of your head, you're not going to know this, but wondering if you would have advice for people who want to find internships in the gaming industry. And then I'm wondering, kind of like more pragmatically, I wonder if we could set something up with the Career Engagement Office to bring people in from companies who host internships.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. That's one of the things that I'm not so in touch with anymore. Certainly at larger companies, there are going to be internship possibilities. Yeah. So Electronic Arts has offices all over the country, and there will be internship opportunities there. Are they paid internships? I don't know. The games industry is notoriously difficult on its workers.
Oh, really?
Because a lot of people want to work in it. Right. In the games industry, it's intensive. Right. It's a volatile industry. So
yeah, we don't want our students exploited.
Yeah. So I think so that's one thing that I would say. I would just say that if you are an individual, from the individual's perspective, you can reach out to companies and ask them if they have internship possibilities. Okay. Yeah. And that's something that, if something was set up at Queens College in the Career Center or whatever, there could be somebody here who did that and compiled a list.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I can talk to them about that. The Career Center does offer internship stipends for unpaid internships. So
Great.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, but as you know, I'm sure much better than I do, that it's not just the unpaid, it's making sure that the students get valuable experience as well,
Yeah.
that they're not spending all their time at Chipotle getting people burritos.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes, for sure.
Anthony.
Yeah. On your point about how volatile it is, there's a lot going on right now about that. There's a whole issue with AAA studios like EA and Activision, and well, they all, like Rockstar gets in trouble a lot because they put out these very dense video games filled with content, but they work their employees to the bone for a product that's gorgeous and amazing. And sometimes it takes that level, but there is some exploitation in the field. And I just looking at other people and knowing people who do this would say going independent in the beginning, right now, especially, might be your best bet. Independent games that don't have even, like Among Us was huge last year, especially during the pandemic because everybody got together. This was like a mobile game, basically. It costs $5 on Steam and it blew up. So just taking chances on your own and even doing basic things and then updating and working, because you could put out, which is something AAA studios do, a half-baked product and people still buy it because of the name and the company. They complain about it. It gets updated. They're putting out unfinished. It's like putting out half a book and then saying, all right, we'll put out the rest of it when you guys complain enough. But independent studios and just producers in general have Steam. They have, which is, if you don't know what Steam is, it's a video game platform where people can put their video games up to be purchased and bought. It was made by Valve, who make Half-Life and Portal and a bunch of other games, Left 4 Dead. They've made so many, but they shifted from video games to a video game platform for people and content creators to put their stuff up. People go on there and they put up their alphas, they put up their betas, they put them up for $1, $2 for free. You can put up your games for free. It's a great place for if you're practicing with Unity, if you're practicing with an engine and you're making something, put it up there and you get feedback. That's what a lot of people do. And then you can either take it down, rework it, go back to it, or just keep updating it while you're going along. It's something that if you are new to the industry, there's a lot of volatility, like you said, in the community. So you might get a lot of negative feedback, but there is a core group of people who will look at your thing and say, okay, this is what you could do. This is what you need to do. They're very receptive and open to people, from my experience, and people I know who want to help you get good. But I also have a cousin who graduated from Rutgers University with a computer design degree or computer animation degree, and he has yet to find work in his field. So it is tough. So that's just something you have to, if you want this, you have to put in the work. You can't just expect a job right out of college, even with an internship. You have to have, like most creative fields, a portfolio and evidence. Like you said before, Rob, you need to show them that you can do this.
I think that's why, and thank you so much for saying all that. I agree with it. I think that's why it's easier in a certain sense being a programmer starting out, even though there's more competition for the jobs, but it's easier to create games. Now, if you're an animator or modeler animator or a texture artist, then you have to be, in order to build up your portfolio, you have to really be in on other projects, a gaming portfolio. But that's what's going to get you somewhere. Is so your friend who just graduated from Rutgers, lots of luck to him. But once he gets that first job, then things will change.
But if you are a texture artist, you can do mods, right? Like mods are probably a nice way to practice your art and show that you can get downloads and stuff like that.
And if you're a modeler and animator, you can do machinima type things, which is, you know, taking models and turning them into like little skits.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry, Anthony. I see. He
Oh,
graduated years ago and is in news television.
it's now
Yeah.
video editing.
Yeah. So it's still, I mean, it still doesn't make it easy to do it.
But that's a great outcome. Like, we'd all love to be novelists or, video game visionaries speaking at E3 or whatever. But like, if you can find a great job ultimately where your bills are paid and you get to, still operate in the world of stuff you love, I think that's a win in the game of life. So,
Yeah, working for news is not so bad. And so back to the volatility thing. Well, you can think about it. So a big company invests millions and millions of dollars into a game, and the game bombs and they're out millions and millions of dollars. And so as it sort of makes sense over time that as the market rises, the bigger companies are taking less and less risks, and you'll see the more innovative stuff happening at, I don't want to say lower levels because that sounds pejorative, but at the lower resource levels. And that's why I was saying before, you have those hardcore gamers are really look to that layer for the best, their favorite gaming experiences, not to Madden 45.
Yeah.
Or was it Assassin's Creed 752?
You're right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Rob Garfield from Queen's College's Center for Teaching and Learning. We're going to end the live stream, but don't hang up. So to everybody who's on the live stream, thank you very much for joining us in our inaugural season of the Queen's Podcast Lab Learning Series. If you stay tuned for our spring series, which we'll eventually put together. And in the meantime, hope to see you all around on the internet. So goodbye to the live stream and take care.